The sun was sinking behind the ancient sandstone rocks of Garden of the Gods when everything went wrong. I've walked these trails 100 times, but that evening, the giant stones looked different somehow, like they were watching me. My name is James Hawthorne. I'm a forest ranger here in Shawnee National Forest, and October has always been my favorite month. The trees turn red and gold, the air gets crisp, and the forest smells like earth and fallen leaves. Usually, this place calms the bad memories that followed me home from Korea. Not today. I stopped on the trail to catch my breath, enjoying the quiet sounds of the forest, squirrels rushing around collecting nuts, geese honking somewhere high above the trees, the soft rustle of leaves in the breeze. Then it happened. Everything went silent, and I mean completely silent. The squirrels froze, the birds stopped singing, even the wind seemed to hold its breath. I've been a ranger long enough to know that when forest creatures go quiet, something's wrong. The shadows between the rock formations started growing darker than they should have been. I checked my watch, still an hour before sunset, but it looked like night was racing in early. My radio made a burst of static, then died. Great. The nearest ranger station was 15 miles away, and I hadn't seen another hiker since the cold front moved in this morning. A flash of red caught my eye as a fox darted across the path ahead. It stopped and stared right at me. I've seen plenty of foxes in my time, but the fear in this one's eyes was different. It looked at me like it wanted to warn me of something before disappearing into the bushes. Then the cold hit. Not the gentle chill of autumn, but a bone-deep freeze that came out of nowhere. Fog started creeping along the ground, wrapping around my boots. We hadn't had fog in weeks because of the dry weather. I looked at my map, then at the trail ahead. Something wasn't right. The path I'd walked dozens of times now vanished into a thick wall of blackberry bushes that shouldn't have been there. I double-checked my position. This wasn't on any of my maps. That's when I heard it, a whistle from somewhere in the trees. Most people would think it was another hiker, but the sound raised the hair on the back of my neck. It was too perfect, and too even to be human. I stood there, the map trembling slightly in my hands as the forest darkened around me. Something was very wrong in these woods tonight, and I had a terrible feeling I was about to find out what. I've been a ranger here for 3 years now. Before that, I was a soldier in Korea. Sometimes I still button my Green Ranger uniform as neatly as I did my army clothes. Old habits die hard, I guess. I never planned on being here alone. Sarah and I were supposed to start a family after I came home from the war, but the man who returned wasn't the same one who left. The nightmares came every night. I'd wake up screaming, but could never explain to her what I saw in those dreams. After a year of trying, she packed her bags and left. I don't blame her. My boss thought giving me this quiet post might help. Just me and the trees, and enough space to sort through the memories that wouldn't leave me alone. 2 men died under my watch in Korea. Their faces still visit me when I close my eyes. I couldn't save them then. Sometimes I wonder if taking this job was just me running away from the world. I touched the scar that runs from my temple down to my jaw. Got that my first year as a ranger, when a sudden flood trapped some campers. I managed to get them out, but the rushing water slammed me into a rock wall, 27 stitches and a permanent reminder to respect nature. A soft whine brought me back to the present. Rex, my German shepherd, pressed against my leg. He could sense something was wrong too. "What is it, boy?" I whispered, kneeling beside him. Rex came into my life at the VA hospital. He was a military dog who'd seen too much, just like me. The handler said Rex wouldn't respond to commands anymore. Guess we recognized something broken in each other. We've been partners ever since. I reached into my breast pocket and pulled out Grandpa's old compass. The metal was worn smooth from years of handling. He taught me everything about these woods when I was a kid. How to track animals, which plants you could eat, how to find your way when the trails disappear. The needle spun lazily, not settling on any direction. That had never happened before. Great, I muttered, just when I need you most. I tucked the compass away and looked around. I knew every trail in this section. I'd remapped them myself after spring floods washed away the signs. This wrong turn shouldn't exist. Part of me wanted to radio for backup and head back to the station, but 4 hikers had gone missing in the past month, and the state police were taking their sweet time sending help. People were counting on me to figure this out. That same stubborn streak that kept me alive in Korea wouldn't let me turn back now. I checked my revolver, making sure the chambers were loaded, then touched the hunting knife at my belt. In 15 years working in national parks, I'd only used these against the occasional rabid animal. Never thought I'd need them for anything else. As the daylight faded completely, I clicked on my flashlight and whistled softly to Rex. Come on, boy, let's go see what's out there. I had no idea that the things hiding in these ancient rocks were beyond anything I'd been trained to face. The beam from my flashlight cut through the darkening forest as Rex and I moved deeper into the woods. About 50 yards ahead, something caught my eye. Marks in the soft dirt. I crouched down to look closer. What do you make of these, Rex? I whispered. The tracks looked like a deer's, but something was off. They were much deeper, as if whatever made them was far heavier than any deer in these parts. And every few feet there was a strange drag mark, almost like a human heel. In 20 years of tracking animals, I'd never seen anything like it. I stood up and felt it again, that complete silence. No crickets chirping, no owls calling, no rustling leaves. Nothing. I could hear my own heart beating faster in my chest. Rex stood completely still, his ears pointed forward, eyes fixed on the darkness ahead. We followed the trail until it led to a massive oak tree. The bark had been deeply slashed. 5 long, straight cuts running from about 7 feet up the trunk all the way down to the roots. Too high for a bear, too neat for storm damage. Something had marked this tree on purpose. Then the smell hit me. Sweet but rotten, like meat left in the sun too long mixed with wet animal fur. There was something else too, a sharp, chemical scent that burned my nose and made my eyes water. Let's keep moving, I told Rex, trying to ignore the growing knot in my stomach. As we approached a small stream crossing, my flashlight beam caught something colorful among the rocks. A red backpack. I hurried over, heart sinking when I saw the Boy Scout patch sewn on the front pocket. The canvas was ripped open, the contents scattered around a half-set-up campsite. A pot still hung over a burned-out fire. Food sat in plates, uneaten. It looked like the campers had vanished in the middle of making dinner. "Hello," I called out, knowing it was probably useless. "Anyone here? Forest Service?" My voice echoed back at me. Nothing else. I clicked my flashlight a few times as the beam began to sputter. I'd put in fresh batteries that morning, but now the light was fading fast. The darkness between the rocks seemed to grow thicker, like it was actually pushing against the light. That's when we heard it. A long, wailing cry echoing off the canyon walls. Not human, not animal, but something in between that made my skin crawl. Rex pressed against my leg, whimpering softly. I'd never seen him scared before. Not even during the worst thunderstorms. "It's okay, boy," I said, not believing it myself. We pushed on through a stand of pine trees and found something that stopped me cold. A deer lay on the ground, or what was left of one. Its chest was torn open, but not in any way I'd seen before. The ribs weren't broken inward, like a predator had attacked it. They were bent outward, as if something had burst out from inside the animal. My hand moved to my revolver. The fog rolled in thicker now, cutting visibility down to just a few feet. It moved strangely, not drifting like normal fog, but reaching out in finger-like strands, as if it was searching for something. For us, I decided we'd seen enough. Time to get back to the station and call in whatever was happening here. I turned around, ready to follow our path back the way we came. But the trail was gone. Where there should have been a clear path, There were now massive rock formations I'd never seen before. Somehow, impossibly, the landscape had changed behind us. "This can't be happening," I whispered, checking my map again. Rex growled low in his throat, staring into the darkness beyond my failing flashlight. I knew then we weren't alone in these woods, and whatever was out there was watching us. I froze. When I saw it, a massive shadow moving between distant trees. Even from far away, I could tell it was huge. At least 8 feet tall, with long, thin arms and something that looked like deer antlers on its head. It slipped behind a rock before. I could get a better look. "Did you see that?" I whispered to Rex, whose growl had turned into a steady rumble. Every instinct from my time in combat was screaming at me. Someone was watching us, tracking us. I could feel eyes on me from every direction, but when I spun around, I saw nothing but darkness and swirling fog. Through breaks in the mist, I caught glimpses of something I still can't fully explain. Pale skin pulled tight over a skeleton-like body, long fingers ending in yellowish claws that scraped against tree trunks, leaving deep marks. It never stayed in view long enough for me to be sure of what I was seeing. "James, help me!" The voice hit me like a punch to the gut. It sounded exactly like Sergeant Miller, the man who had died in my arms in Korea. But that was impossible. Nobody out here could know about him, let alone copy his voice so perfectly. "Who's there?" I called out, my own voice shaking. "This is Ranger Hawthorne. Identify yourself." Nothing answered but the wind. I realized whatever this thing was, it wasn't just following us. It was herding us. Every time we tried to turn back or find another path, it would appear ahead, forcing us to change direction. It was pushing us deeper into the canyon, away from any escape routes. When I finally got a clear view of the creature standing on a ridge, I didn't hesitate. I pulled my revolver and fired twice. The bullets seemed to pass right through it, the creature's shape breaking apart like smoke for a second before pulling itself back together. A screeching sound erupted from just inches behind me. I felt hot, rotten breath on my neck and spun around so fast I nearly fell. There was nothing there, but the feeling of something breathing on me had been too real to imagine. Night had completely fallen now, but something strange was happening with the weather. The temperature plummeted so fast, my sweat froze on my skin. Snow began falling in a perfect circle around us, a blizzard in October that shouldn't have been possible. Rex suddenly locked his eyes on an empty space about 10 feet away and growled. Before I could react, something invisible slammed into him, throwing him through the air. He landed hard, yelping in pain. When I reached him, I saw 4 deep cuts across his side, bleeding into his fur, but nothing had touched him. I helped Rex to his feet, holding my revolver out in front of me, though I now knew it was useless. We backed away slowly, trying to find any path out of this nightmare. The trees around us began to move, branches bending down toward us. There wasn't any wind. The branches were moving on their own, reaching for us like fingers. They herded us farther up the ravine, away from any possible escape route. The voice came again, this time sounding like my grandfather. "James, this way. I can help you." "You're not him," I said through gritted teeth. "Whatever you are, you're not him." A low, rattling laugh echoed through the canyon. I remembered stories my grandfather had told me when I was a kid. Tales from the Algonquin people about creatures called Wendigos, spirits that possessed humans and turned them into hunters that craved human flesh. I'd always thought they were just stories to scare children away from wandering too far into the woods. Now, with my back against the canyon wall and a monster from those same stories stalking me through the impossibly snowy forest, I wasn't so sure anymore. My mind raced as Rex and I backed further into the ravine. The stories my grandfather told me about Wendigos flooded back, creatures that were once human, but transformed by starvation and cannibalism into something monstrous. In those old tales, Wendigos feared 2 things, fire, and being trapped. "Come on, boy," I whispered to Rex. "We're not dying tonight." I had a plan forming, but it was desperate. The ravine walls towered above us, layers of ancient sandstone rock that had stood for millions of years. Some sections looked unstable, with loose boulders balanced precariously. The unnatural blizzard intensified. Ice formed on the rocks around us, making every step dangerous. One wrong move and I'd slip right off the edge into darkness. Rex limped beside me, blood from his wounds freezing in the impossible cold. I felt it before I saw it, claws raking across my back, tearing through. My jacket like paper. The pain came a second later, hot and sharp. I stumbled forward, barely keeping my balance on the icy ground. When I reached behind, my hand came away red with blood that froze almost instantly. The Wendigo screeched, the sound bouncing off the canyon walls. It was toying with me now, knowing I was trapped. Something changed inside me then. In Korea, I couldn't save the men who died under my watch. Their faces haunted my dreams every night. But here now, I could still save Rex. Maybe even stop this thing from hurting anyone else. "You want me?" I shouted into the darkness. "Then come and get me." I limped toward the narrowest part of the canyon, where the walls pinched together and rose almost straight up. The Wendigo followed, just as I hoped it would. I could see it clearly now, a nightmare made real. Its skin was stretched tight over bones that bent at wrong angles. The antlers on its head were cracked and stained dark, its mouth open too wide, filled with teeth like needles. I had 2 bullets left. I'd seen them pass right through the creature before, but I wasn't aiming for it this time. I waited until the Wendigo was directly beneath the most unstable section of the canyon wall. I raised my revolver, steadied my hand, and fired twice at the rock face above. For a terrible moment, nothing happened. Then came a deep, grinding sound as ancient stone began to shift. The Wendigo looked up just as the first boulder broke free. It let out a howl that turned into something almost human as tons of rock crashed down. I dove backward, grabbing Rex and shielding him with my body as dust and smaller rocks showered over us. When it cleared, a massive pile of rubble filled the narrow part of the canyon. No sign of the Wendigo, but I wasn't walking away from this fight. The creature's last attack had cut deeper than I first realized. I could feel the warmth draining from my body, not just from the cold, but from blood loss. With the last of my strength, I dragged myself and Rex to a small cave nearby. My hands trembled as I struck my last 3 matches, finally getting a small fire going from dry leaves and twigs. I pulled out my field journal and started writing everything down. The tracks, the voice, the way it moved, how it created the storm. Someone needed to know what happened here, in case it wasn't really gone. As the fire flickered low, I hugged Rex close for warmth. Through the cave entrance, I could see the pile of fallen rock shifting slightly in the moonlight. Was it just settling, or was something digging its way out? I held Grandpa's compass in my cold hand, watching as the needle finally stopped spinning and pointed firmly north. Too late to help us find our way home. "At least we went down fighting, boy," I whispered to Rex, whose breathing had grown shallow, but steady. My last thought before darkness took me was of the search party that would eventually come looking. Would they find anything but mystery? Would they be prepared if what lurked in the hollow mountain wasn't really gone? I closed my eyes as the snow continued to fall in the forest beyond. I never thought I'd be afraid of the forest. After nearly 30 years as a ranger, these woods were more home to me than my own cabin. But that was before I saw what was hiding between the trees. Something that shouldn't exist. Something that science says can't exist. But I know what I saw, or rather what I almost saw. It started as a perfect autumn day in White Mountain National Forest. The maple and oak trees made a ceiling of red and gold leaves above me, with sunlight coming through, in spots painting the ground with warm golden light. I remember breathing in that crisp mountain air, listening to the peaceful sounds of the stream nearby, woodpeckers tapping on distant trees, and leaves rustling in the light breeze. My name is Ranger Robert Thompson, Bob to most folks, and on that day I was exactly where I wanted to be, among the trees I'd protected for almost 3 decades, but something felt off. I stopped on Cedar Creek Trail and looked around. In some spots, there were no squirrels or chipmunks at all, which made no sense. There were plenty of acorns on the ground, perfect food for them, and it was the right kind of forest for them to live in. But they were just gone. The afternoon. Sun was getting lower, making the shadows between the trees longer and darker. In some spots, the light didn't seem to reach at all, like the darkness was somehow pushing it back. I checked my watch and looked around, suddenly aware of how alone I was. The logging area I was checking was 5 miles from the nearest fire road. My truck was parked 2 miles behind me. This part of the trail hardly ever saw hikers, especially now with all the arguments about the logging keeping tourists away. Suddenly, a grouse, a kind of wild bird, burst out from some bushes. Near me, it was flying so fast and scared that it smashed right into a tree trunk before getting its bearings and disappearing up into the branches. Something had spooked it bad. The weather started changing quickly too. Thin clouds raced across the sky, making the sunlight come and go, and the temperature kept jumping up and down in a way that just wasn't natural. The trail ahead got harder to walk. Thick bushes with thorns grew from both sides, slowing me down and scratching my hands as I pushed through. Even though it was only mid-afternoon, the shadows seemed to be moving on their own, not matching the swaying branches. More than once, I felt like something had just slipped out of my sight, like when you think you see something move, but when you turn to look, nothing's there. I didn't know it then, but I was being watched. And what was watching me was something the forest had never seen before, something it was never meant to see. My faded ranger uniform feels like a second skin to me. I've worn it so long that the patch on my sleeve is frayed at the edges. At 53 years old, I've been a forest ranger longer than most people stay at any job. The forest became my true home 7 years ago, after my wife Jean died of cancer. These days, I hardly use my small cabin at the edge of the park, except to sleep. Most nights, I just sit and look at old pictures of Jean, wondering if I spent too much time chasing poachers and fixing trails while she fought her illness mostly alone. My face is dark brown from all those years in the sun, with deep lines around my eyes. There's a funny patch of white hair in my beard where a bear clawed me 15 years back. I was lucky to walk away from that one. Today I'm not alone, though. Artemis, my red-tailed hawk, sits on my thick leather glove. I trained her myself, and now she's both my friend and my extra set of eyes in the treetops. She spots things I miss. I reach into my breast pocket and touch Jean's wedding ring, which I keep on a chain. I promised her I'd retire next year and finally take that cross-country trip we'd always talked about. Too late for her to come with me, but I'll keep my word anyway. As I walk, I know every tree root and rock on this path. I helped build this. Trail myself back in '72, which makes all these small changes I'm noticing even more unsettling. Things aren't right here and I can feel it. The younger rangers call me Old Mule because I'm so stubborn. It's that same stubbornness that made me come check on this logging problem myself instead of calling in the state people. There have been complaints about the logging company cutting trees outside their permitted area, and I wanted to see for myself. I've spent decades in these woods and handled everything from lost hikers to wildfire and angry moose, but nothing, not one thing in all my years wearing this uniform has prepared me for what's out here. Something science says can't exist. Check my service revolver on my hip and adjust the hunting rifle slung over my shoulder. The official report blamed aggressive bears for the recent disappearances, but I've tracked bears my whole life. This is something else. The sun slips behind. A cloud, and the temperature drops suddenly. I pull my jacket tighter around me and keep walking deeper into the woods. My hand keeps touching the gun at my side, almost without me realizing it. A twig snaps somewhere to my left and I turn quickly, but see nothing. Just stay calm, Bob. I whisper to myself, you know these woods, but a voice in the back of my mind answers, do you really? I stopped in my tracks when I saw the trees. Several of them had strange marks on their trunks. These weren't straight cuts from chainsaws or the rough scratches bears make. These were smooth, curved dents, almost like someone had taken a hot spoon and pressed it into the bark until it melted away. I ran my fingers over one of the marks. It was cool to the touch, but smooth in a way bark should never be. That's when I noticed the silence, not the peaceful quiet of a forest at rest, but a heavy, unnatural stillness. The birds had stopped singing, the insects had stopped buzzing, even the gentle rustle of leaves had died away. All I could hear was my own heart beating and the soft creak of my leather boots when I shifted my weight. Something's wrong, I whispered to Artemis. She fluffed her feathers nervously. I pushed on until I reached the logging site, and what I found made my stomach drop. Everything was abandoned, but not like the workers had gone home for the day. Chainsaws were still stuck in half-cut trees. Lunch boxes sat open with sandwiches barely touched. Truck doors hung wide open, like everyone had run away in the middle of whatever they were doing. A sharp smell hit my nose, like the air after a lightning strike mixed with the smell of pennies. It burned my nostrils. Artemis didn't like it either. She screeched and flapped her wings in agitation. I noticed a blue tarp stretched over some equipment. Something about it seemed off. I lifted one corner and found a yellow hard hat underneath. Inside was a clear, sticky substance that seemed to shine a little when the light hit it just right. It wasn't blood, but something I'd never seen before. I pulled out my radio to call the ranger station. This is Thompson at Cedar Creek logging site. Anyone copy? Over. All I got back was static. I checked the signal. I should have been well within range of our tower. I tried again. More static. That's when I heard it, a clicking sound coming from somewhere in the trees. It was too regular to be natural, too mechanical to be an animal, but somehow it sounded alive. I followed the sound toward the portable toilet the loggers used. Near it, I saw drag marks in the dirt and my heart nearly stopped. A single work boot. I forced myself to look closer. The boot wasn't empty. There was still a foot inside, cut off so clean it looked like a surgeon had done it, not an animal attack. I swallowed hard and checked the time. It was only 4:30, but the forest was getting dark way too fast. Shadows stretched and joined together until most of the ground was black, with just patches of light breaking through. I needed to get back to my truck. I turned to head back the way I came, but nothing looked right. A boulder I had passed earlier was now on the wrong side of the trail. A bent tree I'd noticed on the way in was nowhere to be seen. Somehow, the trail had changed. For the first time in 30 years, I was lost in my own forest. Stay calm, I told myself. The sun sets in the west. The parking area is northeast. Just keep the setting sun on your left shoulder. But as I walked, the shadows seemed to shift and swirl around me. The sun kept disappearing behind clouds, then reappearing in what felt like the wrong place. Nothing made sense anymore, and all the while, that clicking sound followed me. Sometimes from ahead, sometimes from behind, like whatever was making it was circling me, watching me, waiting. I saw it from the corner of my eye first, just a quick flash of movement. Something tall and thin seemed to bend and slide between two trees. But when I turned to look straight at it, there was nothing there. I kept walking, trying to find my way back to the truck, but that feeling of being watched grew stronger. The skin between my shoulder blades tingled like it does when someone's staring at you from behind. "Who's out there?" I called, trying to keep my voice steady. No answer came back, just that clicking sound again, a little closer now. Suddenly, Artemis let out a shriek I'd never heard from her before. Her wings beat frantically against my arm, and before I could calm her, she launched off my glove and flew wildly up into the trees. My loyal hawk, who had never left me in 7 years, vanished into the canopy. "Artemis!" I shouted. But she was gone. That's when I saw it again, something impossibly thin, sliding around a tree trunk like water flowing upright. Its limbs stretched longer than any animal's should. And just like before, when I turned to look directly at it, there was nothing. There, with a cold chill, I realized it was studying me, learning how I moved, watching my reactions, waiting for the right moment. This wasn't a bear or any animal I knew. This was something else, something smart. I pulled my rifle from my shoulder and aimed at a movement to my right. I fired and the shot echoed through the trees, but when I went to check, the bullet had hit a tree that should have been clear. It was like what I was seeing and what was really there didn't match up anymore. Then I heard it, a strange warbling sound coming from all directions at once. It was like someone playing a warped record, backward underwater. It made my teeth hurt and my head swim. I stepped in a puddle and looked down, and there, reflected in the water, I saw it. It looked a bit like a person, but all wrong. Too tall, too thin, with arms and legs that seemed to stretch and shrink at will. It had no face that I could see. When I looked up in fear, there was nothing in front of me. But I had seen it in the reflection. It was real. The forest itself seemed to be helping this thing. Branches reached down to trip me. Roots rose up from the ground to catch my boots. Every path I took led me in circles. It was playing with me. Each time I caught a glimpse of it, it was closer than before. I'd see it behind a tree 30 feet away. Then seconds later, it would be sliding around a trunk just 10 feet behind. Me, always just out of direct sight, always in the corners of my vision. My breath came in short gasps now. I was running, though I didn't know where to. The sunlight was almost gone. Soon it would be dark, and I had a terrible feeling that's when the thing would finally make its move. I tripped over a root and fell hard, my rifle sliding away into the brush. As I pushed myself up, my hand touched something cold and smooth, a side mirror from one of the logging trucks. It must have been knocked off. In the mirror's reflection, I saw the thing again, this time directly behind me, so close I could almost feel it. But when I spun around with my revolver drawn, there was nothing but empty air and long shadows. That's when I remembered something. An old story my grandfather told me when I was a boy. About a forest creature the loggers called the hide-behind. Something that could never be seen directly, only glimpsed from the corner of your eye or in a reflection. I'd always thought it was just a campfire story to scare kids. But now, I clutched the mirror in my shaking hand. If this thing could only be seen in reflections, then maybe that was also its weakness. Night was falling fast, and I was running out of time. My hands wouldn't stop shaking as I formed a desperate plan. If this thing, this hide-behind, could only be seen in reflections, then maybe that was how I could catch it. I ran back toward the logging site, stumbling in the growing darkness. My flashlight beam bounced wildly ahead of me. The abandoned trucks were still there, and I worked quickly to pull off every side mirror I could find, 6 in total. "Come on, Bob, think," I muttered to myself as I arranged the mirrors in a circle around a small clearing. "If you can see it, maybe it can't hide anymore." The temperature was dropping fast. A thick fog began rolling in between the trees, making it hard to see more than a few feet ahead. The mirrors were my only hope now. As I set the last mirror in place, something sharp slashed across my cheek. I felt warm blood trickle down my face, but I saw nothing near me. The hide-behind was getting bolder. My hands trembled as I finished my trap, thinking about the 2 young rangers who would come looking for me if I didn't return. They'd be walking into danger without knowing it. Even if I didn't make it out, I had to leave some proof of what was happening here. I pulled out my notebook and quickly wrote down everything I'd seen. I tucked it securely in my pocket, hoping someone would find it. The darkness was almost complete now. Just the faint glow of dusk and my flashlight lit the area. I stood in the center of my mirror circle and waited. "I know you're there," I called out, my voice sounding small in the vast, silent forest. "I know what you are." The clicking sound started again, closer than ever. The warbling noise joined it, making my head pound. I turned slowly, watching the mirrors, waiting to catch a glimpse of the creature. There, in the mirror to my right, I saw movement. The hide behind was closing in, growing confident in the darkness. It moved from tree to tree, each time appearing closer in the reflection. I kept turning, following it with my eyes in the mirrors, but never looking directly where I knew it was. This seemed to confuse it. It paused, tilting what passed for its head, and then, by pure luck or fate, the hide behind moved too close to one of the mirrors. I saw its full reflection, and it saw that I could see it. What I saw in that moment is hard to describe. It was shaped like a person, but wrong in every way. Too tall, too thin, its arms and legs bent at impossible angles. And its face, there was no face, just a smooth surface that somehow still seemed to be looking right at me. The hide behind froze when our eyes met in the reflection. Then it let out a high-pitched sound so terrible that I had to cover my ears. The mirrors cracked and shattered, but not before I had looked directly into its eyeless face. Something happened to my mind in that moment. It was like trying to understand. A color that doesn't exist, or count to a number that has no name. My brain couldn't make sense of what I was seeing. I felt myself falling, though I was still standing. The world tilted and spun. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. All I could do was stare straight ahead as the hide behind came closer. The last thing I remember is cold. A cold so deep it felt like it was inside my bones. Then darkness. They found me 3 days later. 2 junior rangers on a search party spotted me sitting perfectly straight against a tree trunk. They said I was just staring into empty space, not blinking, not responding when they called my name. My body was fine. No injuries except for the cut on my cheek, but my mind was somewhere else. They took me to the hospital where the doctors used words like catatonic state and severe trauma. They found my journal with my frantic notes about something I could never quite describe. I don't remember any of this. They told me about it later, after I started talking again, almost 6 months after they found me. The logging company quietly gave up on cutting trees in that section of White Mountain. 3 more loggers were found a week after me, all sitting upright just like I had been, but they weren't as lucky. They were completely drained of blood, their faces frozen in looks of pure terror. I retired from the ranger service. Some days, I can almost convince myself it was all just a breakdown from stress and grief over losing Jean. Almost. But on cool autumn nights when the fog rolls in, I close all my mirrors and cover all the reflective surfaces in my house. Because sometimes, just from the corner of my eye, I catch a glimpse of something tall and thin sliding around a tree outside my window. And I know it's still out there, hiding behind the trees, waiting for someone else to wander too deep into its forest. I still have nightmares about yellow eyes watching me from the darkness. Even now, months later, I wake up in cold sweats, feeling like something is trying to crawl inside my skin. But I should start at the beginning, before the tourists went missing, before I was forced to remember everything my grandfather taught me that I tried so hard to forget. My name is David Wilson. I'm a park ranger at the Grand Canyon, and I've spent the last 10 years trying to escape who I really am. Growing up Navajo on the reservation, I was surrounded by stories and traditions that felt like chains around my neck. So I left, got myself a fancy education, a government job with a crisp uniform, and pretended the old ways were just superstitions. That autumn changed everything. It was unusually warm for late October. The canyon walls glowed red at sunset, like they were covered in fresh blood. Strange clouds formed overhead, sometimes looking like faces watching us from above. The tourists didn't notice anything wrong, but some of the older Navajo who worked in the park were getting nervous, leaving early, whispering about signs and warnings. I ignored them. Adjusted my turquoise bolo tie, the one traditional thing I still wore with my uniform, and focused on my job. Science, facts, and park regulations. That's what mattered to me, not old stories about monsters and magic. My boss, Ranger Lewis Johnson, was even more dismissive than me. Superstitious nonsense, he'd say whenever anyone mentioned the strange feeling in the air. We've got tourists to keep safe and a park to run. That was before the bus disappeared. I remember standing at the edge of the canyon that last normal evening, watching the sun sink below the horizon. The wind picked up, carrying dust that stung my eyes and whispered with voices I told myself weren't real. My fingers touched the small medicine pouch hidden under my shirt, the one I claimed to keep out of habit but really wore for protection. Something deep inside me knew that the old ways existed for a reason, that some boundaries shouldn't be crossed, but I wasn't ready to admit that yet. Not until people started dying. Not until I saw my first skinwalker. Wilson, we've got a situation. Johnson's voice crackled over my radio early Tuesday morning. Tourist bus missed its checkpoint, last seen heading toward Horseshoe Mesa. I grabbed my gear and headed out. The morning air was warm, too warm for late October, and the silence felt wrong. No birds singing, no small animals scurrying in the brush, just emptiness and the feeling of being watched. It took me 2 hours to reach the last known location. The big white tour bus sat perfectly parked at an overlook, like someone had placed it there carefully. No skid marks, no signs of trouble. Just an empty bus where there should have been 23 people, a family of 4, and some college students on a field trip. I approached slowly, hand resting on my holster out of habit. The bus door was wide open. "Hello? Park Ranger Wilson." "Anyone here?" My voice echoed back at me. Inside, everything looked normal at first. Backpacks still in the overhead bins. Half-empty water bottles in the cup holders. Cell phones left behind. Who leaves without their phone? Then I saw them. 3 animal pelts laid across the back seat. I frowned. Tourists aren't allowed to bring animal remains into the park. And these weren't local. One looked like a wolf pelt, but wolves haven't lived in this part of Arizona for decades. I picked up one of the pelts and nearly dropped it. It was warm, like it had just been removed from a living animal. And for a second, just a split second, I thought I saw it twitch. I keyed my radio. "Johnson, I found the bus. No sign of passengers. Need backup and search team." Only static answered me. Then something else. Voices whispering beneath the static. Not English, not Navajo either. Something older. I tried again. "Johnson, do you copy?" This time his voice came through, broken up. "Say again. Signal's bad." That's when I noticed the marks on the outside of the bus. Deep scratches in the metal, like claw marks, but too big for any canyon predator I knew. 4 parallel lines, deep enough to gouge the steel. I took photos, bagged the pelts as evidence, and started searching the area. No footprints leading away from the bus. No signs of panic. It was like 23 people had simply evaporated. By late afternoon, a preliminary search team arrived. We found nothing. No tracks, no clothing, no blood. Nothing to indicate what happened. The sun was setting when I returned to the ranger station. An old woman was waiting for me outside. Elia Manuelito, 80 years old, and respected as a medicine woman on the reservation. I hadn't seen her since I left the reservation years ago. She'd been friends with my grandfather. "You found the bus," she said. Not a question. "How did you know about that?" I asked. She ignored my question. "You found what was left behind." A chill ran through me. "I found some animal pelts, yes." Her eyes, cloudy with cataracts but somehow still sharp, fixed on me. "Those who walk between shapes are hunting again. The mining woke them." I sighed. This was exactly why I'd left the reservation, the superstitions, the old stories. "Miss Manuelito, we have a serious situation. If you have actual information—" "You wear the pouch your grandfather gave you." She cut me off. "You haven't forgotten everything." My hand went to my chest, where the small leather pouch rested against my skin. "It's just habit," I lied. "When you were a boy, he taught you the ways to recognize them, to fight them. You remember?" "Those were just stories," I said, but my mouth went dry. "You will remember when you see them," she said, turning to leave. "The Yi Naldlushi, those who wear stolen skins." I wanted to call after her to ask more questions, but my training stopped me. This was a missing persons case, not some supernatural event. I had to focus on facts, evidence. That night I couldn't sleep. Around midnight I heard it, a human scream, distant but clear, echoing across the canyon. I jumped up, grabbed my flashlight and ran outside. The scream came again, but this time it changed halfway through, warping into something that sounded like an animal howl. I stood frozen, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, showing nothing but empty paths. And shadows. Just a coyote, I told myself. Just the wind playing tricks. But my hand reached for the medicine pouch, and for the first time in years, I whispered one of my grandfather's protection prayers. Morning came with no sign of the missing tourists. I hadn't slept much, jumping at every sound outside my window. Johnson called an emergency meeting at sunrise. "We've got 23 missing people and 0 leads," he said, looking at our small team gathered in the ranger station. "National Park Service has authorized a full search operation." I'd be leading a team with 3 others. Dr. Patricia Hayes, an archaeologist who had been mapping old cliff dwellings in the area, Miguel Ortiz, an experienced canyon guide with military training, and Johnson himself. "Those marks on the bus," Dr. Hayes said while checking her gear, "they don't match any animal native to the canyon." "Mountain lion could do it," Johnson suggested. I shook my head. "Too big, too deep, and mountain lions don't typically attack buses." "Maybe someone did it with a tool," Ortiz offered, "to scare us or throw us off." We headed out as the sun climbed higher. The day was hot again, the kind of heat that makes the air shimmer and plays tricks on your eyes. I kept seeing movements at the edge of my vision, but when I turned to look, nothing was there. By midday, we found their campsite about 2 miles from where the bus had been parked. Food still sat on paper plates, half-eaten. Tents were set up but empty. A campfire had burned down to cold ashes, but someone had drawn strange symbols in the grey dust. Dr. Hayes crouched down to examine them. "These don't look random. Kids messing around," Johnson said with a shrug, but Hayes shook her head. "I've seen similar markings in ancient Anasazi ruins. They use these symbols as warnings about what they called skin thieves." I felt that same chill from yesterday. Skin thieves, those who walk between shapes. The old stories were starting to echo in my head. Ortiz found a camera lying in the dirt nearby. The screen was cracked, but it still worked. We scrolled through the photos, smiling tourists at various canyon viewpoints, group shots, selfies with the sunset. Then the last few images made us all go quiet. "What's wrong with their shadows?" Ortiz asked, pointing at a group photo. The people in the picture looked normal, but their shadows stretched across the ground didn't match their shapes. "We're there. Should have been human silhouettes." The shadows elongated into something that looked more animal than human. "Camera glitch," Johnson said, but he didn't sound convinced. We decided to split up to cover more ground. Johnson and Ortiz would check a nearby ravine, while Hayes and I searched the area around the cliff dwellings she'd been studying. We shouldn't separate, I said, remembering my grandfather's warnings about never splitting up in places where bad spirits might be hunting. We've got radios, and we're burning daylight, Johnson replied. Meet back here in 3 hours. As Hayes and I hiked toward the cliffs, I spotted something bright blue tucked between 2 rocks. It was a doll, the kind little girls carry everywhere. Its yarn hair had been arranged in a specific pattern I recognized from my childhood. My grandmother used to braid her hair that way when performing protection rituals, but no child would know that pattern. I slipped the doll into my pocket without showing Hayes. My mind was racing, trying to remember everything my grandfather had taught me about the Yi Naldlushi, the skinwalkers, the beings who could take the shape of animals or humans by wearing their skins. These cliff dwellings are over 1,000 years old, Hayes said, as we approached the ancient stone structures built into the canyon wall. The people who lived here disappeared suddenly. No one knows why. My radio crackled. Johnson's voice came through, excited. Wilson, we found someone. One of the college students. He's alive but disoriented. We're bringing him. The radio cut off with a sound that might have been static, or might have been a scream. Johnson, do you copy? Nothing but static answered me. Hayes looked worried. Should we go back? Oh. Before I could answer, dark clouds rolled in from nowhere. The wind picked up, whirling dust around us in circles that looked almost like running wolves. Within minutes, the storm was so bad we could barely see. We need shelter, I shouted over. The howling wind. We ran to the cliff dwellings, ducking into a low entrance. Inside, protected from the storm, we caught our breath. Hayes switched on her flashlight, and its beam showed ancient paintings on the walls. Human figures with animal heads chasing smaller human shapes. That's not standard Anasazi art, she whispered. The storm raged outside, throwing dust and debris against the cliff. As the sun set, the temperature dropped fast. We had no choice but to make camp here for the night, waiting for the storm to pass. In the darkness, with only our small fire for light, I thought I saw the painted figures moving on the walls. And outside, above the sound of the wind, came noises that might have been howling wolves, except there haven't been wolves in the Grand Canyon for nearly 100 years. I clutched my medicine pouch and remembered more of my grandfather's teachings, the ones I'd tried so hard to forget. The stories of skinwalkers who could steal your face and wear it like a mask. The ancient evil that the Navajo never spoke of after dark. We shouldn't have split up, I whispered. Dawn broke with an eerie silence. The storm had passed, leaving the canyon coated in a thin layer of red dust. Hayes and I made our way back to the meeting point, calling for Johnson and Ortiz on the radio. Nothing but static answered us. Maybe their batteries died, Hayes suggested, but her voice was tight with worry. We reached the meeting point and found no sign of them. After waiting 30 minutes, I made the call to search for our missing teammates. Let's check the ravine where they said they found a survivor, I said. We hiked down into the narrow gully where Johnson and Ortiz had last reported from. The path was narrow, with high rock walls on either side. Perfect place for an ambush. My mind whispered. Look, Hayes pointed to a splash of color against the red rock. It was Johnson's uniform shirt, torn to shreds like something had ripped it apart. No blood, no body, just the shredded fabric with his name tag still attached. This doesn't make sense, Hayes said, picking up the tag. Where is he? A sound came from further down the ravine, a shuffling, dragging noise. We moved carefully toward it, me in front with my hand on my sidearm. Around the bend, sitting with his back against the rock wall, was a young man about 20 years old, one of the missing college students. Hey there, I said gently, approaching slowly. I'm Ranger Wilson. We've been looking for you. The young man didn't look up. He was rocking slightly, arms wrapped around his knees. Can you tell us your name? I crouched down a few feet away from him. Jake, he mumbled. Jake Carlson. Jake, where are the others from your group? And did you see 2 rangers here yesterday? He shook his head, still not making eye contact. Something about the way he moved felt wrong, like his joints weren't working quite right, like someone wearing a suit that didn't fit. "We need to get him to medical help," Hayes said. When I reached out to help Jake stand up, he flinched away, violently. For just a second I thought I saw a yellow flash in his eyes. "Don't touch me," he hissed, then seemed to catch himself. "Sorry, just headache. Bad headache." We radioed for emergency extraction and waited with Jake. He wouldn't talk much, wouldn't look at us directly, and kept sniffing the air like he was tracking a scent. By midday, 2 more survivors walked into our camp on their own. A middle-aged woman named Susan and her teenage daughter Emily from the family of 4. Their story didn't make sense. They claimed they got separated from the group while hiking and spent 2 days trying to find their way back. "But why didn't you return to the bus?" I asked. "What bus?" Susan said, looking confused. "We took a shuttle." Hayes shot me a worried glance. These people had definitely been on the tour bus. Their names were on the manifest. While Hayes talked with the new survivors, I hiked up to a ridge to get better radio reception. From there, I could see across the canyon to where another section of cliff dwellings clung to the far wall. Using my binoculars, I noticed something moving around the ancient ruins, too big to be coyotes, too fast to be people. When I returned to camp, Hayes pulled me aside. "I've been examining the pictographs in the ruins," she whispered. "They tell a story about creatures that could steal people's shapes. The Anasazi called them skin thieves, but they match descriptions of what Navajo people call skinwalkers." I nodded slowly. "My grandfather used to warn me about them. I thought they were just stories to keep kids from wandering off." "There's more," Hayes continued. "This area we're in, it's a ceremonial site. See how the rocks are arranged in that pattern." She pointed to a formation I hadn't noticed before. "That's not natural. It's man-made, very old." With a shock, I realized she was right. The rocks formed a pattern my grandfather had once drawn in the dirt, warning me never to enter such places. "We need to move camp," I said urgently. "Now." But before we could start packing up, Jake approached us. He moved differently now, smoother, more confident. "Have you seen Emily?" he asked. "The girl. She wandered off that way." He pointed toward a narrow side canyon. Hayes went to check with Susan, while I questioned Jake more. When I asked about the rest of his group, he smiled strangely. "They're coming," he said. "They're all coming back soon." Something in his voice made the hair on my neck stand up. When I looked directly at his eyes, I saw it again, a flash of yellow, like animal eyes catching the light. Hayes returned, worried. "Susan says Emily was just here, but now she's gone." We organized a quick search, with Susan staying at camp. Hayes and I took one direction, while Jake volunteered to search another path. I didn't want to split up again, but we had no choice if we wanted to find the girl before dark. Half an hour into our search, we heard Emily scream. We ran toward the sound, scrambling over rocks and through narrow passages. We found her backed against a rock wall, staring in horror at something we couldn't see around the corner. "Emily!" Hayes called, rushing to the girl. "It's Jake!" Emily whimpered. "Something's wrong with Jake." I drew my sidearm and moved around the corner. Jake stood there, head tilted at an unnatural angle, watching me with eyes that now glowed yellow. "In the shadowed canyon." "What are you?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. Jake smiled and his face seemed to shift, not all at once, but like something was moving under his skin, trying to push through. "You know what I am, David Wilson," he said, his voice deeper now with an odd echo. "Your grandfather knew us well." Then his face began to change. His nose and mouth stretched forward, forming a muzzle. Hair sprouted from his skin, his hands curled into claws. I fired a warning shot into the air. "Stay back!" The thing that had been Jake laughed, a sound that was half human, half animal. "Howl," "The sun is setting, David," it said. "Night belongs to us." Then it turned and ran, not like a human runs, but on all fours, faster than anything should be able to move over rough terrain. Within seconds, it had vanished into the shadows. I stood there, gun still raised, my grandfather's warnings echoing. In my mind, the skinwalkers were real, and they were hunting us. We spent the night huddled in one of the cliff dwellings, taking turns keeping watch. Emily was shaking with fear, and Susan kept staring blankly into space, not responding when we spoke to her. Something was wrong with her, too, but she hadn't changed like Jake had. When morning came, there was still no sign of Johnson or Ortiz. But as Hayes and I were discussing our next move, a voice called out from below. "Hello? Anybody up there?" I peered over the edge and felt a rush of relief. It was Ortiz, looking tired but alive. We helped him climb up to our shelter. His uniform was torn and dirty, and he had scratches on his face and arms. "What happened to you?" I asked. "Where's Johnson?" Ortiz shook his head. "I don't know. We found that kid, Jake, and then I can't remember. I woke up in a cave about a mile from here. No sign of Johnson." Something about his story felt off, but I was just glad to have another ranger with us. We needed all the help we could get. Hayes showed us her notebook, where she'd been translating some of the pictographs from the ruins. "The ancient people who lived here believed these skinwalkers could be stopped," she said. "They had rituals, protective measures." "Like what?" I asked, my interest piqued. "Crushed obsidian creates a barrier they can't cross. Cedar smoke blinds them temporarily. And there's something about their name. Speaking it gives them power. But there's a specific chant that weakens them." I nodded slowly. "My grandfather taught me some of these things. I just never believed they were real." Ortiz looked between us. "Wait, you two actually believe in these monsters?" "You didn't see what happened to Jake," Emily said quietly. "His face, it changed." Ortiz rubbed his eyes. "I've been having strange dreams, running on 4 legs, hunting." A chill ran through me. I remembered my grandfather's warnings about how skinwalkers take over their victims. First through dreams, planting their thoughts in your head. "We need to find Johnson and get out of here," I said. "Call in a full evacuation of this section of the park." But when I tried the radio, there was nothing but that same whispering static. We were on our own. Hayes suggested we check out some deeper ruins she'd found earlier in her research, a place that might have been used as a shelter during attacks. "The old ones knew how to protect themselves," she said. "We might find something useful." We gathered our supplies and set off, keeping Emily between us. Susan followed silently, her movements stiff. I kept a close eye on Ortiz, too. Something about the way he kept sniffing the air, how he winced when the sun came out from behind clouds. By midday, we reached a hidden entrance in the canyon wall, a low opening that led to what Hayes called a kiva, an underground ceremonial chamber. "Be careful," she warned as we ducked inside. "These places are sacred." The air was cool and stale inside. Our flashlights revealed a large circular room with stone benches around the edges. Ancient paintings covered the walls, more of those human-animal figures chasing people. "Someone's been here recently," Ortiz said, pointing to fresh footprints. In the dust. He was right. And not just footprints. There were drag marks, too, like something heavy had been pulled across the floor. Hayes discovered a narrow passage leading deeper into the rock. We followed it carefully until it opened into a smaller chamber that made us all freeze in horror. The walls were lined with shelves carved into the stone. On those shelves lay what looked like dried, leathery human skins, preserved somehow, stretched out flat like grotesque leather coats. "Oh my God," Hayes whispered. Emily started crying. Even Susan seemed to snap out of her daze, her eyes widening in fear. "The uranium mining," Hayes said suddenly. "The new mines they opened last year, they must have disturbed an ancient burial. Aground, that's what woke them." I looked closer at one of the preserved skins. It was old, maybe centuries old, but something about it seemed wrong. The proportions weren't quite human. These aren't human skins, I said slowly. These are their original forms, the skinwalkers. They were something else before they started stealing human shapes. A noise from behind made us turn. Ortiz was bent over, hands braced against the wall, breathing hard. Ortiz, you okay? I approached him cautiously. When he looked up, his eyes flashed yellow in the beam of my flashlight. The light hurts. I backed away, positioning myself between him and the others. Ortiz, how long have you been having those dreams? He straightened slowly, his movements becoming smoother, less human. Since I woke up in that cave, something was in there with me, Wilson. Something that looked like Johnson, but wasn't. Fight. It, Ortiz, I said firmly. Don't let it take over. Hayes pulled me back. How do we know if someone is fully possessed? She whispered. I remembered the test my grandfather had taught me. Forbidden knowledge that medicine men weren't supposed to share with children. But he had taught me anyway, saying someday I might need it. Salt, I said. They can't stand the taste of pure salt. We had salt packets from our emergency rations. I took one out and approached Ortiz again. Miguel, we need to check something. Just open your mouth. He looked suspicious, but did as I asked. I poured a tiny amount of salt onto his tongue. The reaction was immediate. He screamed, a sound that no human throat should make, and spat violently. His eyes flashed yellow again, staying that way longer. It's happening to me, isn't it? He gasped. When the fit passed, I can feel it inside, like something crawling under my skin. We're going to help you, I promised, though I had no idea how. As the day wore on, Ortiz's condition worsened. He became sensitive to light, complained of hunger that nothing would satisfy, and his movements became increasingly jerky and unnatural. We decided to make camp in the outer chamber of the kiva, away from those preserved skins. I used some of the crushed obsidian Hayes had collected to make a circle around our camp, a boundary line that, according to legend, skinwalkers couldn't cross. As night fell, we heard them gathering outside, yipping calls that weren't quite human. Shadows moved past the entrance to the kiva. Then Ortiz started convulsing. His back arched unnaturally, and sounds came from his throat that made Emily cover her ears. It's taking him over, Hayes whispered. The full transformation. Susan suddenly stood up, her movements smooth and purposeful. Now, she smiled, and her eyes flashed yellow. Too late, she said in a voice that wasn't hers. He's ours now, you're all ours now. She stepped over the obsidian line like it wasn't even there, and grabbed Emily by the arm. I lunged forward, but something hit me from behind. Ortiz, moving with impossible speed. The last thing I saw before losing consciousness was Ortiz's face beginning to elongate into a muzzle, and Susan dragging a screaming Emily out into the darkness where yellow eyes waited. I woke up with a throbbing pain in my head. Dawn light filtered weakly through the kiva entrance. Hayes was slumped against the wall nearby, a bruise darkening on her forehead. Hayes, I whispered, shaking her. Gently. Wake up. Her eyes fluttered open. Wilson, what happened? Ortiz and Susan. They took Emily. It all came flooding back. The transformation, the attack, the yellow eyes watching from the darkness. For so many years, I had run from my heritage. Now I had no choice but to embrace it. We have to find Emily, Hayes said, struggling to stand. First, we need protection. I pulled the medicine pouch from around my neck and emptied its contents. A small bundle of cedar, a piece of turquoise, and a pinch of corn pollen my grandfather had blessed. It's not much, but it's a start. Something had changed inside me. The wall I'd built between my modern life and my traditional upbringing had crumbled. I closed my eyes and let the prayers I'd been taught as a child rise to my lips. Words I hadn't spoken in years, but still remembered perfectly. Hayes watched me silently. When I opened my eyes, she nodded. Tell me what we need to do. The pictographs you translated, was there anything about trapping skinwalkers? She pulled out her notebook. Yes. There's a ritual that can bind them in their animal form so they can't shift anymore, but it requires specific items and needs to be performed in a special place. The ceremonial cave, I said, remembering something my grandfather once told me. There's supposed to be one somewhere in this canyon, a place with paintings that go back thousands of years. Hayes's eyes widened. I know where that is. I mapped it last summer. It's about a mile from here, higher up in the canyon wall. We gathered what supplies we had left and headed out. The canyon was eerily quiet. No birds, no insects, not even the wind. Just heavy silence and the feeling of being watched. I used the crushed obsidian to make protection marks on our arms and faces. We chewed cedar needles, which my grandfather said would mask our scent from the skinwalkers. As we climbed higher into the canyon, I spotted something that made my blood run cold. Footprints in the sandy path that started as human feet, but gradually changed to animal paws. They're close, I whispered. The ceremonial cave was hidden behind a narrow crack in the rock face. We had to squeeze through sideways, our backpacks scraping against the stone. Inside, the cave opened up into a high-ceilinged chamber. Ancient paintings covered the walls and ceiling, more detailed and vivid than the ones in the kiva. They told a story. Humans living peacefully, then dark shapes coming from underground, people changing into beasts, and finally, a ceremony with figures standing in a circle around trapped animal forms. This is it, Hayes breathed, the binding place. In the center of the cave was a stone altar, stained dark with what I feared was ancient blood. Around it, stone tablets with carvings were arranged in a circle. Hayes examined them closely. These have to be the binding stones. The pictographs showed how they're used to trap the skinwalkers in their animal forms. We set to work preparing for the ritual. Hayes deciphered more of the ancient texts while I gathered what we needed. Crushed obsidian to make a circle, cedar bundles to burn, and hardest of all to accept, blood from my own veins to activate the stones. The texts say the ritual needs to be performed by someone with a connection to the spirits, Hayes explained. That's you, Wilson. I rejected all of this, I said bitterly. I turned my back on it. But it didn't turn its back on you. She replied. As the sun rose higher, we finished our preparations. The cave entrance darkened suddenly, and a voice called from outside, "David Wilson, we have the girl." I approached the entrance cautiously. Standing outside was Johnson, or what looked like Johnson. His uniform was torn, his eyes gleaming yellow, in his too rigid face. "Let Emily go," I demanded. "Come out and face us," the thing wearing Johnson's skin said, "or we'll wear the girl next." Behind him stood Ortiz, now barely recognizable as human. His face had elongated into a wolf-like muzzle, his hands curved into claws. Beside him was Susan, holding a terrified Emily by the arm. "They can't enter the cave," Hayes whispered to me. "Look, they're staying outside the entrance. This place is protected somehow." I stepped back from the entrance. "We need to draw them in, get them inside the circle of binding stones." "How?" I took a deep breath. "I have to offer them what they want most, a willing host." Hayes grabbed my arm. "Wilson, no. It's the only way." I turned back to the cave entrance. "I'm coming out, but I want to see the girl first." The Johnson thing smiled with too many teeth. "Wise choice." They let Emily go. She ran to the cave entrance, sobbing. Hayes pulled her inside to safety. Then I stepped out to face them. There were more now. Shapes, moving in the brush that had once been the missing tourists. Yellow eyes watched hungrily. "My grandfather hunted your kind," I said, addressing the creature wearing Johnson's face. "Now I understand why he taught me the old ways. Your grandfather killed many of us," it hissed, "but we are ancient. We were here before your people came. What do you want? To live again? To hunt again?" It smiled, showing teeth that were Too sharp. The mining woke us. Now we take new skins. Why not just kill us? Dead skins rot. Living hosts. Vessels that accept us. Those last longest. I heard Hayes inside the cave, whispering the ancient words, preparing the ritual. And if I offered myself willingly? I asked. The skinwalker's eyes gleamed brighter. A willing host is most valuable of all. Then take me instead of the others. I backed slowly toward the cave entrance, the skinwalkers following. Johnson, Ortiz, Susan, all moving with that same unnatural grace, all watching me with those same hungry yellow eyes. Inside, the leader said, away from the sun. Step by step, I led them into the cave, toward the circle of binding stones. Hayes had Emily hidden behind the altar, continuing the ritual preparations. Once all three skinwalkers were inside, I moved quickly to close the circle, pouring the last of the crushed obsidian across the cave entrance. The leader realized the trap too late. It lunged for me, Johnson's face melting into something ancient and terrible. I dodged, slashing my palm with the knife Hayes had prepared, letting my blood drip onto the central stone tablet. Hayes began chanting in a language I didn't recognize, older than Navajo, older maybe than any living tongue. The stone tablets began to glow with a dull red light. The skinwalkers howled, a sound that hurt my ears and made my vision blur. They tried to flee, but the obsidian line held them inside the circle. You must complete the ritual, Hayes shouted over their cries. The texts say it requires personal sacrifice. I knew what that meant. My grandfather had lost 2 fingers in his life, something he'd never explained. Now I understood. With a swift motion, I brought the knife down on my left hand's little finger. Pain shot through me, but I pressed the bleeding stump to each of the stone tablets, marking them with my sacrifice. The cave filled with blinding light. The skinwalkers' forms wavered, human features melting away until only animals remained. A wolf, a coyote, an eagle. They thrashed and howled, but the binding was working. They were trapped in these forms now, but one remained partly transformed, Ortiz. He was caught between shapes, his body twisted grotesquely between human and wolf. His eyes, still human, found mine. Wilson, he gasped through a half-formed muzzle. Kill me, please. Those human eyes, filled with pain and understanding, broke. My heart. My friend was still in there, trapped inside the monster. I'm sorry, Miguel, I whispered, raising the knife again. I did what had to be done. As the ritual completed, the stone tablets cracked and fell to dust. The skinwalkers in their animal forms collapsed, not dead but bound, unable to transform, unable to possess their power contained. But as the light faded, I caught my reflection in a smooth stone wall. For just a second, I thought I saw a flash of yellow in my own eyes. We made it out of the canyon 2 days later. A search and rescue. Team found us near one of the main trails, exhausted, injured but alive. Emily hadn't spoken since the cave. Hayes had a concussion, and my hand was badly infected where I'd cut off my finger. I told the official story, just like Hayes and I had agreed. A group of tourists got lost, suffered from heat exposure and hallucinations. Some wildlife attacked, maybe mountain lions. Ranger Johnson and most of the tourists were still missing, presumed dead. Ranger Ortiz died trying to save others. No one questioned it too much. People go missing in national parks more often than you'd think. Nature is dangerous. Animals attack, people get lost. Of course, no one mentioned skinwalkers. 3 weeks later, I visited the reservation for the first time in 10 years. The tribe didn't welcome me with open arms. Using the forbidden knowledge of skinwalkers, even to fight them, was taboo. Several elders refused to speak to me. But Ellie, Manuelito, invited me to her home. She cleaned my healing wound and mixed herbs into a tea for me to drink. Your grandfather would be proud, she said, as we sat by her fire. He hunted them too, in his time. Why didn't he tell me? I asked. He hoped you would never need to know. She studied my face carefully. But he saw the signs in you, even as a boy. That's why he taught you what he did. What signs? She didn't answer directly. They will come again. The binding is temporary. A few years, maybe 10. And then someone will need to bind them. Again. Her eyes held mine, or destroy them completely. I looked down at my hand. 4 fingers now instead of 5. The sacrifice had been worth it, but I couldn't shake the memory of that yellow flash I'd seen in my own eyes. Hayes called me a few weeks after that. Her academic career was basically over. She'd published a paper about what we found, careful to leave out the supernatural elements, but her colleagues ridiculed her wild theories about an ancient tribe that could somehow transform into animals. "I'm going back," she told me over the phone. "Those ruins hold more answers. Something happened to those ancient people, something that created the skinwalkers." "It's not safe," I warned her. "That's why I need your help." I declined. I needed time to figure things out. The nightmares hadn't stopped. Dreams of running on 4 legs under the moon, of hunting human prey. Dreams that felt too real. Emily was in therapy now. The official diagnosis was PTSD and trauma-induced selective mutism. Her doctors said she might never speak again about what happened in the canyon. Maybe that was for the best. I took a leave of absence from the Park Service, moved into a small cabin on the edge of the reservation, started learning the old ways from Ellie and a couple of other elders who were willing to teach me. 3 months after we escaped the canyon, I was washing my face one morning when something caught my eye in the mirror. A flash of yellow reflected back at me. I blinked and it was gone. But I'd seen it clearly. That night I woke up outside my cabin. The moon was full and I was standing barefoot in the dirt. My hands caked with soil like I'd been digging. In the distance, a coyote howled, and something inside me wanted to answer. I went back inside and sat at my kitchen table until dawn, the knife I'd used in the ritual ceremony in front of me. My grandfather had 2 missing fingers. Was this why? Had it happened to him too? The binding ritual had trapped the skinwalkers, but something of them had transferred to me. The yellow eyes, the strange urges, the blackouts. It was growing stronger on. My shelf was a folded animal skin I'd found on my porch one morning. I didn't know what animal it had come from, something not native to Arizona. I hadn't touched it, but I couldn't bring myself to get rid of it either. Each day I fought the urge to try it on, to see if it would fit, to feel what it would be like to wear another skin. This morning, I found dirt under my fingernails again. Dirt and something darker that might have been blood. I can't remember where I went in the night. The skin is calling to me now. I can hear it whispering when the house is quiet. My phone rang earlier. It was Hayes again. "I found something in the ruins," she said, her voice excited. "About what happens after the binding ritual, about the person who performs it. David, you need to come back. You need to know what's happening to you." I told her I'd think about it. But the truth is, I'm afraid of what she's discovered. Afraid. It might confirm what I already suspect. The ritual didn't just bind the skinwalkers, it bound them to me. Tonight is another full moon. I've locked all the doors and windows, chained myself to the radiator. The knife is within reach, just in case, but the skin is there too, folded neatly on the shelf, waiting. And somewhere deep inside me, something with yellow eyes is waiting too. My grandfather fought this battle his whole life. Now it's my turn. I just don't know if I'm strong enough to win. I knew the cave would kill me the moment I first saw it. My name is Thomas Nakamura. I've spent 14 years working as a park ranger, with most of that time focused on search and rescue. I'm the guy they call when hikers go missing in places where helicopters can't reach. I'm the one who rappels down cliff faces, squeezes through narrow rock cracks, and brings people home. But this time was different. This time, I wasn't just leading a rescue, I was looking for answers about my father. It was summer 1995, and the government shutdown had left Bears Ears National Monument with barely any staff. The blazing Utah sun pushed temperatures above 110 degrees during the day, while nights dropped to a bone-chilling 40 degrees. Perfect conditions for things to go wrong with no help around. I stood at the edge of Cedar Mesa, looking down into the maze of sandstone canyons that had swallowed my father. 20 years earlier, Hiroshi Nakamura had been a brilliant archaeologist, known for discovering hidden ancestral Puebloan sites that others missed. The official report said he fell during a climb. They never found his body. I never believed it. Ranger Nakamura? The research team has arrived. Dr. Melissa Rodriguez approached, her geologist's hammer hanging from her belt, dark curly hair pulled back tight, desert dust already coating her boots. Something about her reminded me of my father. Maybe it was the way her eyes lit up when talking about what might be hiding underground. Thanks, Dr. Rodriguez. Let's get them briefed. 4 university researchers climbed out of their dusty van, looking like excited kids rather than PhD candidates. 2 men, 2 women, all of them blinking at the harsh sunlight and endless horizon. A red rock that stretched in every direction. "Welcome to the middle of nowhere," I said, tracing the scar above my right eyebrow, a nervous habit I picked up after a rope snapped during a cave rescue years ago. The nearest town is 4 hours away, and our radio contact is spotty at best. Out here, we follow protocols because they're the difference between coming home or becoming a statistic. I walked them to the cave entrance we'd be exploring, a narrow black slash in the sandstone wall. The university had special permission to document this newly discovered site, hidden behind an ancient cliff dwelling that had somehow remained untouched for centuries. "Buddy system at all times," I continued, handing out emergency packs. Each bag has glow sticks, backup batteries, water purification tablets, and a first aid kit. No one, and I mean no one, goes anywhere alone. As the team unpacked their specialized equipment, I pulled out my father's journal. I hadn't told anyone that I recognized this place from his sketches. The particular arrangement of rocks at the entrance, too regular to be natural, matched his drawings exactly. "This mapping system is state-of-the-art," said Webb, the youngest. Researcher, holding up what looked like a metal detector with extra antennas, "should give us a 3D model of any caves within 100 feet. I nodded, not really listening. My attention had been caught by something on the rock face. Ancient petroglyphs showing tall, stretched-out human figures with 2 long limbs and oversized eyes. They looked like they were climbing up from beneath the earth. Dr. Rodriguez appeared, beside me. Creepy, aren't they? The local tribes have stories about people who went underground during a great drought and never came back up. Said they changed down there, became something else. I tried to ignore the chill that ran up my spine. Let's get the survey started. Daylight's burning. As the team dispersed to set up their equipment, I walked deeper into the first chamber, alone, breaking my own rule. Something pulled me forward. The cave seemed to swallow sound in a way I'd never experienced before. But then, oddly, I heard a whisper from what must have been hundreds of feet away, crystal clear, as if someone stood right behind me. I spun around, nobody there. When I returned to the entrance, the sun was setting, painting the desert in fire. We set up base camp nearby, with tents forming a circle around our supply cache. "This place has incredible acoustic properties," Dr. Rodriguez said over our simple dinner. I whispered into a small chamber we found, and Thomas heard me. All the way at the entrance could revolutionize our understanding of how ancient people use these spaces. I nodded, but didn't mention the other whispers I'd heard, ones that hadn't come from any member of our team. That night, as everyone settled into their tents, I pulled out my father's journal again. His final entry, dated days before his disappearance, contained a warning I'd never fully understood until now. They're down there, watching from the darkness. The Chinagini, the pale ones who hunt below. As I finally drifted off to sleep, I could have sworn I heard soft scratching sounds. I woke up before sunrise, my watch showing 5:18 a.m. Something felt wrong. The air was too still. No birds, no insects, no wind, just dead silence hanging over our camp. I grabbed my flashlight and clicked it on. Nothing happened. I tried again, tapping it against my palm. Still dead. I'd put in fresh batteries yesterday. Outside my tent, the cool pre-dawn air hit my face. The thermometer on my pack showed 40 degrees, unusually cold, even for the desert. I checked my radio next. The battery indicator showed full, but when I tried to make a test call, all I got was a strange static hiss that rose and fell like breathing. Power issues. Dr. Rodriguez appeared beside me, her own flashlight flickering weakly. Yeah. All the batteries are draining fast, I said, keeping my voice calm, though my skin prickled with unease. Could be the cold. But I knew that wasn't it. 20 years in the wilderness had taught me to trust my instincts, and everything in me was saying something wasn't right. By the time everyone was up, we had more problems. The mapping equipment would turn on but shut down after a few minutes. The satellite phone wouldn't connect at all. Did anyone move the equipment last night? I asked, looking at our gear, which wasn't quite where we'd left it. Everything seemed shifted a few inches from its original position. Everyone shook their heads. Maybe animals? Suggested Lopez, the team's photographer. I examined the ground around our camp. The fine desert dust should have shown footprints or paw prints, but there was nothing, just smooth, undisturbed earth. Yet somehow our equipment had moved. Let's split into pairs and check the immediate area, I said. No one goes more than 50 feet from camp alone. Dr. Rodriguez walked with me toward the cave entrance. The sun was just starting to touch the tops of the mesa, sending long shadows across the canyon. I barely slept, she admitted. Kept hearing these whispers, like someone was talking just outside my tent. I nodded. I heard them too. Inside the cave entrance, Dr. Rodriguez set up her depth-sounding equipment. After several attempts, she finally got a reading. This can't be right, she said, frowning at the device. According to this, the cave system extends down over 800 feet. That would make it one of the deepest in the region. Could the equipment be malfunctioning? I asked. Possibly, but she pointed to small crystals embedded in the cave wall. These formations typically only occur at extreme depths. I think the reading might be accurate. Webb and Chang, the anthropology specialists, joined us carrying a small case. You need to see this, said Chang, her face pale. She carefully opened the case to reveal a human skull and several bones arranged in a pattern. We found a small chamber, about 30 feet in, Webb explained. These were laid out in a circle, definitely a ritual arrangement, not natural. I studied the bones without touching them. They were old, but not ancient. The skull still had traces of what looked like hair. We'll need to document this and inform local tribal authorities, I said. Webb nodded and pulled out a carbon dating unit, a portable version that could give rough estimates. After processing a tiny sample, he stared at the readout in confusion. This doesn't make sense. It's giving two different results. He turned the screen so we could see. One says approximately 50 years old. The other says over 3,000. Equipment malfunction, Chang suggested, but didn't sound convinced. After documenting the bone site, we sent up a small drone to map the cave entrance. Webb controlled it with careful movements, navigating the narrow passages. Look at this, he said, pointing to the screen. The drone had found a massive chamber about 60 feet in. As we watched the video feed, something moved in the corner of the frame. Something tall and thin that seemed to flow rather than walk. It was only visible for a split second. What was that? I asked. Can you rewind? Webb played it back frame by frame. There was nothing there, just shadows and rock. Probably just interference, Webb said, but I noticed his hands were shaking. That afternoon, the sun beat down mercilessly. The temperature gauge read 115 degrees in the shade. We retreated to the cave entrance where it was cooler, reviewing our findings. "I want to set up sound recorders tonight," Dr. Rodriguez said. "The acoustic properties here are unlike anything I've ever encountered. Sound doesn't behave the way it should." To demonstrate, she walked about 20 feet into the cave and whispered something. Her words reached us at the entrance with perfect clarity, as if she stood right next to us. But when she spoke at normal volume from the same spot, we could barely hear her. "It's like the cave is designed to carry whispers," she said when she returned. That night, we placed sound recorders throughout the first section of the cave and in our camp. After a simple dinner of rehydrated stew, everyone retreated to their tents early, exhausted from the heat and the strange tension that none of us would acknowledge. I couldn't sleep. My father's journal lay open beside me, his words seeming to jump off the page. They mark their prey first. By the time you notice the marking, it's already too late. Around midnight I heard it, soft whispering coming from the cave entrance. It sounded almost like my name, repeated over and over in a voice that wasn't quite human. I grabbed my backup flashlight and stepped outside. The night was clear and cold, stars blazing overhead without a hint of cloud. The cave mouth was a darker patch of black against the dark landscape. As I watched, I could have sworn I saw something move just inside. A tall, thin shadow that bent in ways a human shouldn't be able to bend. I blinked, and it was gone. When I turned back toward the tents, I froze. In the space between my tent and Lopez's, all our equipment had been arranged in a perfect circle, something that would have taken at least 10 minutes and made plenty of noise. Yet I'd heard nothing, and there were no footprints in the dust. Spent the rest of the night sitting outside my tent, my back against a rock, watching the cave entrance. Every so often I would hear those whispers again, too faint to make out words, but somehow calling to me, and somewhere in those dark hours before dawn, I began to understand why my father had been so drawn to this place, and why he had never returned. Morning came with no answers, just more questions. The sound recorders picked up something, Dr. Rodriguez said, her eyes ringed with dark circles. She hadn't slept either. "Listen." She played back the recording. At first, there was nothing but the gentle hiss of empty cave air. Then, around 2:13 a.m., the whispering started. It was too faint to make out words, but it had a rhythm like someone talking. Then a second voice joined in, then a third. Soon, there was a whole chorus of whispers, growing louder until they suddenly stopped at exactly 3:33 a.m. "Could be wind," Lopez suggested, but we all knew there had been no wind last night. "We need to map the main chamber today," I said, trying to stick to our plan. "We'll split into 3 teams. Each team takes a different section. No one goes anywhere alone." I paired Webb with Chang to document the eastern section of the main chamber. Dr. Rodriguez would go with Lopez to study the cave formations in the western section. I would work on setting up a secure base camp inside the cave entrance where we could store equipment safely. "Keep radio contact every 15 minutes, I reminded everyone. "If you miss 2 check-ins in a row, we all come looking." The teams prepared their gear. I couldn't shake the feeling we were being watched. The cave mouth seemed to breathe, like some giant creature waiting to swallow us. Webb and Chang were the first to head deeper into the cave, their headlamps casting long shadows. Dr. Rodriguez and Lopez followed soon after, taking a different tunnel that branched to the left. I worked methodically, setting up our backup equipment in a small alcove near the entrance. The sun outside was already blazing, pushing the temperature above 100 degrees, but inside, the cave stayed a cool 65 degrees. The first radio check-in came right on time. Everyone reported normal findings, just more tunnel stretching deeper. The second check-in was the same. At the third check-in, Webb's voice crackled through with excitement. "Thomas, we found something incredible. A huge chamber with, you won't believe this, hundreds of handprints on the ceiling. Handprints? I asked. Like from ancient people? No, Webb replied, his voice breaking up slightly. They look fresh, and they're too big. The fingers are really long, and they're on the ceiling, at least 30 feet up. A chill ran through me despite the desert heat. Stay where you are. I'm coming to you. I radioed Dr. Rodriguez to let her know I was going to Webb's location. Her response came through with heavy static. We've found strange crystals reacting to touch. Get warm when... The radio cut out completely. I grabbed my pack and followed Webb's route, moving quickly through the narrow passage that opened into the main chamber. The space was enormous, at least 100 feet across, with a ceiling that disappeared into darkness above. Webb and Chang stood in the center, their headlamps pointed upward. When I joined them and looked up, my breath caught. The entire ceiling was covered with handprints, hundreds of them. Each one had fingers that were twice as long as a normal human's, with an extra joint in each finger. And Webb was right. They didn't look ancient. The marks were clear and sharp, as if made recently. How? Could anyone reach the ceiling? Chang whispered, her voice echoing slightly in the vast space. They couldn't, I said. Not without serious climbing gear. Webb pointed to the far wall. There's more, look. A section of the wall was covered in symbols that looked similar to the petroglyphs outside, but more complex. They showed tall, thin figures surrounding smaller, normal human shapes. In some drawings, the tall figures seemed to be dragging humans downward into the earth. As I studied the wall, I noticed a pattern that looked familiar. I pulled out my father's journal and flipped to one of his sketches. The match was perfect, a specific arrangement of symbols that he had copied 20 years ago. According to his notes, it marked a hidden passage. I ran my hands along the wall where the passage should be and felt a slight draft. Pressing harder, a section of rock shifted slightly. "Help me with this," I said. Together, the three of us pushed against the rock face. Slowly, a slab of stone pivoted, revealing a narrow tunnel behind it. "This wasn't on any of the maps," Webb said, excitement overtaking caution. Before we could explore further, our radios crackled to life. It was Lopez, and he sounded terrified. "Something's in here with us." Melissa saw it, tall, thin, moving on the walls like a spider. "We're coming back to the entrance now." "Stay where you are," I said firmly. "We'll come to you. Don't move alone." Static was the only reply. "We need to find them," I said to Webb and Chang. "Now." We hurried back through the main chamber toward the western passage. The air felt different, heavier, like before a storm. Our headlamps seemed dimmer too, the batteries draining faster than they should. "Melissa! Lopez!" I called out, my voice echoing through the tunnels. No answer. We found Dr. Rodriguez alone, kneeling beside a strange formation of crystals. They glowed faintly, with an inner light that pulsed like a heartbeat. "Where's Lopez?" I asked. She looked up confused. "He was just here. He went around that corner to take pictures and..." She trailed off, looking around, as if seeing the space for the first time. "How long ago?" I demanded. "Just a minute, maybe 2. She stood, swaying slightly. "Thomas, these crystals, they're not in any geology textbook. When you touch them, they warm up and the patterns inside change." I grabbed her arm. "We need to find Lopez now. This place isn't safe." As we searched the nearby passages, calling Lopez's name, Webb's radio picked up something. A voice that sounded like Lopez, but the words were garbled. "Lopez? Where are you?" Webb called into the radio. The voice came again, clearer this time. "Help me. Down. I'm down here." "Where is here?" I asked. "The deep, the hollow place." The radio went silent again. We continued searching for over an hour, covering every inch of the western passage, but found no sign of Lopez, no footprints, no equipment, nothing. It was as if he'd simply vanished. "We need to go back to the entrance and regroup," I finally said. though the decision felt like failure. As we made our way back, Chang suddenly froze, pointing her light at the cave wall. Was that there before? A symbol had been scratched into the stone, fresh marks in the ancient rock. It showed a stick figure with a circle around it. "It's a mark," I said, remembering my father's journal. "They mark their prey." "Who does?" Chang asked, her voice barely a whisper. Before I could answer, we heard a sound that made my blood run cold. It was Lopez's voice again, coming from somewhere deep in the cave system. "Guys, where are you? I can see your lights." We all turned, shining our lights down the passage behind us. There was nothing there. Then we heard the same voice, coming from a completely different direction. "I found something weird down here. You need to see this." "That's not possible," Dr. Rodriguez whispered. "He can't be in two places at once." "It's not him," I said, grabbing her arm. "We need to get back to the entrance now." Just as we started moving, Lopez's voice came again, this time from directly above us. "Look up." Against every instinct, we raised our lights to the ceiling. There, clinging to the rock like a spider, was a tall, pale figure. Its limbs were too long, bent at odd angles. Its skin was white as bone, stretched tight over a skeletal frame. And its face, a face with oversized black eyes that reflected our lights like pools of oil. For a split second, it just watched us. Then it opened its mouth and let out a sound that wasn't quite a scream, more like the screech of metal against stone. Chang dropped to her knees, hands over her ears. Webb stumbled backward, his body rigid. I felt a wave of paralysis wash over me, my muscles locking up. The creature moved with impossible speed, skittering across the ceiling and down the wall. It paused just long enough for me to see it clearly, to see how its joints bent backwards, how its fingers ended in sharp points, how its mouth contained row after row of needle-like teeth. Then it was gone, vanishing into a crack in the wall. That seemed too small for it to fit through. The paralysis faded slowly. We stood in shocked silence, our headlamps illuminating only empty stone where the creature had been. "What was that?" Webb finally managed to say, his voice shaking. "I think," I said slowly, "we just met what happened to my father. We ran. There's no shame in admitting it. We ran back to the cave entrance as fast as our legs could carry us, stumbling over rocks, scraping against walls, hearts pounding so loud I could hear nothing else. Only when we reached the small alcove I had set up near the entrance did we stop, collapsing on the ground, gasping for breath. "What was that thing?" Webb kept saying over and over. "What was that thing?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I pulled out my father's journal with shaking hands and flipped to the pages I had been avoiding. "The Tsinajini," I read aloud. "The pale crawlers. Dad was researching them before he disappeared." Dr. Rodriguez looked over my shoulder at the journal. "Your father knew about these creatures?" I nodded slowly. "He found references to them in Navajo legends, stories about a tribe that retreated underground during a massive drought 1,000 years ago. They stayed down there so long, they changed." Showed them my father's sketches, remarkably accurate drawings of the creature we had just seen, with notes about its physical adaptations. "They can climb on any surface," I continued, reading from the journal. "They navigate through perfect darkness using some kind of echolocation, and they can mimic human voices to lure prey." "Prey," Chang repeated, the word hanging in the air. "Us, we're the prey." "And Lopez?" Webb asked, his voice small. I shook my head. "I don't know." Outside, the sun was setting, painting the desert red. We should have been heading back to base, camp, but no one moved. The cave entrance felt safer somehow, despite what we had seen. "We need to try the satellite phone again," Dr. Rodriguez said. "Get help." Webb pulled it out and tried, but there was only static. Then through the static, we heard something that made us all freeze. Lopez's voice coming through the phone speaker. "Hello? Can anyone hear me? I'm lost. It's dark." Webb dropped the phone like it had burned him. "They're mimicking him," I said quietly. to draw us deeper. "What do they want?" Chang asked. I turned the page in my father's journal, revealing more notes and sketches. Dad thought they were studying us, learning about humans. He found evidence that they've been taking people for centuries, not just killing them, but keeping them. There were rumors in the 1800s about miners who disappeared and were found later changed, pale and blind, with strange abilities. "That's impossible," Dr. Rodriguez said, but without conviction. "Maybe," I admitted, "but something's down there. Something that can climb on ceilings and mimic voices and paralyze with a scream. Something that took Lopez and might have taken my father 20 years ago." As night fell completely, we decided to stay in the entrance alcove rather than return to our tents outside. We set up a watch rotation, one person awake at all times, UV lanterns creating a circle of light around us. During my watch, I studied my father's journal more closely. In his final entries, he described finding a hidden chamber with pictographs showing the creature's history. According to the ancient drawings, they weren't just a tribe that changed. They had undergone some kind of ritual transformation. They had chosen to become what they were. Why would anyone choose that? Morning came with no answers and no sign of Lopez. We were exhausted, jumping at shadows and the smallest sounds. "We need to get back to town," Webb said. "Get help." "And tell them what?" I asked. "That cave monsters took Lopez? They'll think we're crazy or that we did something to him." "We can show them these," Dr. Rodriguez said, pulling out the small camera she'd been using to document our findings. She scrolled through the images, stopping on one from yesterday. There, just barely visible in the background of a shot of some crystals, was a tall, thin shadow stretching along the wall. Too tall to be human, with limbs at impossible angles. "Evidence," she said. We decided to split up. Webb and Chang would hike back to where we had left the truck, drive to town for help. Dr. Rodriguez and I would stay at the cave to search. For Lopez, keeping to the entrance area only. As Webb and Chang prepared to leave, I noticed something odd on Chang's wrist. A small mark that looked like a bruise, but in a perfect circle. "When did you get that?" I asked, pointing to it. She looked down, confused. "I don't know. I didn't have it yesterday." A chill ran through me. My father's journal had mentioned marks, the way the creatures tagged their prey. "You shouldn't go," I said, but she just shook her head. "We need help, Thomas. Real help." I couldn't argue. With that, we watched them walk away, following the trail back toward the mesa's edge, where our truck was parked. "They'll be fine," Dr. Rodriguez said, but she didn't sound convinced. While waiting, we decided to review our recordings and notes, trying to piece together what we knew about the creatures. Dr. Rodriguez had collected a small sample of the strange crystals we had found. They seemed to respond to body heat, glowing faintly when touched. "These aren't just rock formations," she explained. "They're almost like living tissue, but mineralized. I've never seen anything like them." As the day wore on with no word from Webb and Chang, we grew increasingly uneasy. The sun was already low in the sky when we heard the truck engine start in the distance, a sound that should have been reassuring, but somehow wasn't. The radio crackled to life. "Thomas? Melissa? We made it to the truck." It was Webb's voice, tense but clear. "But there's something wrong. The GPS isn't working and I don't recognize the landscape. Everything looks different." "What do you mean?" I asked. "The landmarks are wrong. The mesa looks different. It's like we're not in the same place anymore." Dr. Rodriguez and I exchanged worried glances. "Just follow the trail back the way you came," I instructed. "That's just it," Webb replied, his voice rising with panic. "The trail's gone. There's no sign of it ever being here." Before we could respond, the radio went silent. We tried calling back, but got nothing but static. Then faintly through the static I heard whispering, multiple voices speaking words I couldn't quite make out. An hour later, just as darkness was falling, Webb returned alone. He stumbled into our camp, eyes wide, clothes torn. "Where's Chang?" I asked, rushing to help him sit down. "Gone," he said, his voice hollow. "We were driving and then the road just ended. There was a drop-off that shouldn't have been there. We got out to check and Chang walked a few steps ahead and—" He swallowed hard. The ground just opened up underneath her. She fell. I heard her screaming as she went down and then nothing. I handed him water, which he drank with shaking hands. I tried to find a way down to her, but there was no bottom I could see. Just darkness. Then I heard her voice calling from behind me, from the truck. But when I got there, no one was there. Dr. Rodriguez examined a cut on Webb's arm while I tried the satellite phone again. Still nothing but static. "We need to face facts," I said grimly. "We're trapped here. Whatever these things are, they're not letting us leave." That night, huddled in our alcove with lights pointed in all directions, Webb developed a fever. The cut on his arm had turned an angry red, with strange black lines spreading from it like roots. "I keep hearing them," he whispered, his eyes unfocused, whispering all the time now. I checked my father's journal again and found a passage that made my blood run cold. The transformation begins with a mark, then comes the fever, heightened senses, and finally, the voices. They speak directly into the mind, calling the marked one deeper into the earth. I showed Dr. Rodriguez the passage while Webb slept fitfully. "You think he's changing?" she asked, horror in her voice. "I don't know, but we need to find out what these things are and how to stop them before it's too late." In the early hours of the morning, Webb suddenly sat up, fully alert despite his fever. "I know where Lopez is," he said, his eyes bright in the darkness. "They showed me." "Who showed you?" I asked carefully. "The others, the ones below." He pointed down. "They're not what you think. They were people once. Some still remember being human." He turned to me, his gaze intense. "Your father is down there, Thomas. He's still alive." "Your father is alive." Webb's words hung in the air like smoke. "That's impossible," I said, but my heart raced. "He disappeared 20 years ago." Webb's eyes had a strange glow to them in the lantern light. "Time works differently down there. They showed me." Dr. Rodriguez placed her hand on Webb's forehead. "He's burning up." This could be the fever talking. But Webb grabbed my arm with surprising strength. "I can take you to him. To all of them." "All of them?" Dr. Rodriguez asked. "The ones they've collected. Over years, decades." Webb's speech had changed, becoming choppy, like he was translating from another language. "They learn from us, study us." I checked his arm again. The black lines had spread further, reaching his shoulder now. His skin, where the lines ran, was cool to the touch, almost cold. "We need to get him help," I whispered to Dr. Rodriguez. "How?" she replied. "We can't leave and no one knows we're here." She was right. The reality of our situation was sinking in. No one would look for us for days, maybe weeks. The research trip was approved for a month, and with the government shutdown, the skeleton, park staff wouldn't notice anything wrong. We were on our own. Morning came with a new problem. Webb was gone. While Dr. Rodriguez and I had finally fallen into exhausted sleep, he had slipped away without a sound. His sleeping bag was empty, still warm. "Webb," I called into the cave, my voice echoing back mockingly. No answer. "We have to go after him," I said, already packing emergency supplies into my backpack. Dr. Rodriguez nodded grimly. "I know." We followed. The main passage, back to the large chamber with the handprints on the ceiling. The hidden doorway we had discovered earlier was still open, the dark tunnel beyond beckoning. "He went this way," I said, pointing to fresh scuff marks on the dusty floor. The tunnel sloped downward at a gentle angle, spiraling deeper into the earth. The air grew cooler, damper. Our headlamps seemed dimmer with each step. After about 20 minutes of careful descent, we reached a fork in the tunnel. Both paths looked identical. Which way? Dr. Rodriguez asked. I studied the ground for tracks, but found none. Then I remembered something from my father's journal. I pulled out my UV flashlight and shined it on the walls. Under the ultraviolet light, previously invisible markings glowed a bright blue-green. Symbols and arrows covered the walls, forming a complex map. My father wrote about this, I explained. The creatures hate UV light. It burns their skin, but they use these markings to navigate. Following the symbols that seemed to indicate depth, we chose the right-hand tunnel. It descended more steeply, requiring us to brace against the walls. As we went, the tunnel opened suddenly into a vast underground space that took my breath away. A cavern larger than a football stadium, with a ceiling so high our lights couldn't reach it. Stalactites hung like massive stone teeth, some reaching all the way to the floor, but what made us both freeze was what covered the walls. Structures that looked like houses, built into the rock itself. Hundreds of them connected by narrow ledges and crude staircases carved from stone. It's a city, Dr. Rodriguez whispered, an underground city. In the center of the cavern floor stood stone formations arranged in circles, almost like meeting areas. Strange tools made of bone and crystal lay scattered around, along with piles of what looked like human belongings, watches, backpacks, and cameras, items collected over decades. I moved closer to examine one pile and felt my heart stop. There, half buried under newer items, was an old-style camera I recognized immediately. It had my father's initials carved into the base. He was here, I said, picking it up with trembling hands. Dr. Rodriguez joined me, her flashlight illuminating more of the collection. Look at all this. These things go back decades, maybe centuries. As we explored, we found an area that seemed to be a crude laboratory. Tables made of flat stone held jars containing liquids and preserved specimens, plants, insects, small animals, and what looked disturbingly like human tissue samples. They're scientists, Dr. Rodriguez realized. In their own way, they're studying everything from the surface. A noise from above made us both look up. Something was moving along the ceiling, crawling between stalactites with spider-like grace. We quickly dimmed our lights and pressed ourselves against the wall. The creature descended head first down a stalactite, its pale body glowing faintly in the darkness. It moved to one of the tables and began sorting through items with long, precise fingers. I fumbled in my pack for the UV flashlight, but before I could find it, another noise caught our attention. Human voices from a tunnel on the far side. Of the cavern came Webb, walking steadily, but with an odd, jerky gait. Behind him stumbled Lopez, alive but changed. His skin had taken on the same pale color as the creature's, and his eyes had grown larger, darker. "Webb," I called softly. He turned toward us, and in the light of our headlamps, I could see how much he had changed in just hours. The black lines now covered half his face, and his eyes had begun to enlarge, the pupils expanding until almost no white remained. "You came," he said, his voice a raspy whisper. "They said you would." The creature at the table hissed and scrambled back up to the ceiling, disappearing into the darkness. "Webb, we need to get out of here," I said, moving toward him slowly. "All of us," he smiled, revealing teeth that had grown sharper. "Why would we leave? There's so much to learn." Lopez said nothing, just stared at us with those two large eyes. "Where's Chang?" Dr. Rodriguez asked. "Is she alive?" Webb nodded toward another tunnel, changing like me, like all of them. As my eyes adjusted to the dim light, I began to notice more movement in the cavern, pale figures watching from doorways in the wall houses, from behind stalagmites, from narrow ledges above, dozens of them. Some looked almost fully like the creatures, while others were in various stages of transformation, like Webb and Lopez. "Your father is waiting," Webb said to me. "He wants to show you what he's learned." He turned and began walking toward a large opening on the far side of the cavern. Without waiting to see if we followed, he disappeared inside, Dr. Rodriguez gripped my arm. "Thomas, we can't go in there." "I have to know," I said. "If there's even a chance he's alive." "It's a trap," she insisted. "These things have been hunting humans for centuries. They're using your father to lure you deeper." She was probably right, but I couldn't turn away. Not when I was this close. "I'll go," I decided. "You stay here. If I'm not back in 30 minutes, try to find your way out." "No way," she said firmly. "We stick together." Together, we followed Webb through the opening, which led to a narrow passage that descended even deeper. The walls here were covered in more advanced versions of the symbols we'd seen outside, complex formulas and diagrams that reminded me of physics equations. The passage ended at a circular chamber with a domed ceiling. The entire room was lined with the strange crystals we'd found earlier, causing it to glow with a faint blue light. In the center stood what looked like a throne, made of the same crystalline material. And sitting on it was a figure that made my heart lurch painfully in my chest. The man was ancient, his skin nearly translucent and stretched tight over protruding bones. His eyes were enormous black pools that reflected the crystal light. His limbs had elongated, fingers now ending in sharp points. But despite all these changes, I recognized the face. It was older, transformed, but unmistakable. "Dad," I whispered. The figure tilted its head, studying me with those black eyes. Then, slowly, it nodded. "Thomas," he said, his voice like dry leaves rustling. "You came." Dr. Rodriguez gasped beside. "Me? Impossible. After 20 years, my father, or what had once been my father, gestured around the chamber. Time means little here. Distance, too. The tunnels connect places that should be miles apart." "What happened to you?" I asked, my voice breaking. "Evolution," he replied simply. "I discovered something wonderful, Thomas. An entirely new branch of human development." He held up his elongated hand. "They've been down here for thousands of years, changing, adapting. They can see in perfect darkness, sense the smallest vibrations, communicate across miles through the rock itself." Webb stood beside the throne, looking pleased, like a favored student. "And now you change others," I said, anger rising through my shock. "You take them against their will." My father's expression shifted to something like sadness. "Not all. Some come willingly once they understand." "I did. You abandoned your family," I said, the words bitter in my mouth. "You abandoned me to discover something greater than myself," he replied. "And now you're here too. We can continue the work together." He gestured to Webb, who approached me with something in his hand, a small crystal, pulsing with inner light. "Just a small cut," Webb said. "That's all it takes. Then your mind opens to them. You hear their thoughts. You understand." I backed away. "No, this isn't right." My father stood from his throne, unfolding to his full height, at least 7 feet tall now. "We're building a bridge between two species, Thomas. Think of the knowledge, the possibilities." As he spoke, I noticed something on the floor of the chamber. A small backpack half hidden behind the throne. It was Chang's. "Where is she?" I demanded. "Where's Chang?" My father's expression hardened. "Joining us, like you will." Dr. Rodriguez had been silent, but now she spoke up. "The marks on Webb's arm, the black lines. That's how it happens, isn't it? Some kind of infection." Webb smiled, showing those 2 sharp teeth. "A symbiotic organism. It rewrites DNA, enhances what's already there." "It's a parasite," she countered. "It's changing you into something else. Something better," my father said. I'd had enough. While they were focused on Dr. Rodriguez, I had been inching my hand toward my backpack, toward the UV flashlight. "I'm sorry, Dad," I said, "but I can't let this happen to anyone else." I yanked out the flashlight and switched it on, aiming the ultraviolet beam directly at my father and Webb. Their reaction was immediate and horrifying. Both screamed in pain, skin blistering where the light touched it. My father collapsed back onto his throne, covering his face with elongated hands. Webb fell to his knees, the black lines on his skin seeming to writhe under the light. "Find Chang," I shouted to Dr. Rodriguez, sweeping the UV beam in an arc to keep the creatures at bay. From the entrance to the chamber, more pale figures appeared, their black eyes reflecting the light. But they wouldn't approach, hissing and shrinking back from the UV rays. "Thomas, please," my father called, his voice pained. "You don't understand what you're destroying." But I did understand. I understood that whatever this was, whatever he had become, it wasn't human anymore. And it was taking others, changing them, building its colony with stolen lives. "Dr. Rodriguez," I called, keeping the light trained on the creatures. "Over here," she shouted from a small side chamber. "I found Chang. She's alive, but we need to move fast." With one last look at the thing that had once been my father, I backed away toward Dr. Rodriguez's voice, the UV light our only shield against the gathering creatures. Chang was barely conscious, her skin already showing the first signs of change, and pale patches spreading from a cut on her neck, her eyes beginning to darken. "Can you walk?" I asked, keeping the UV light pointed at the entrance where the creatures lurked, hissing in the shadows. She nodded weakly. "I think so." Dr. Rodriguez helped her stand. "We need to go now, Thomas." I handed Dr. Rodriguez my backup UV flashlight. "Keep this pointed at them. Don't let them get close." With Chang supported between us, we backed out of the small chamber into the larger throne room. My father still sat hunched on his crystal seat, his skin smoking where the UV light had touched. But his eyes, those huge black eyes, followed our every move. "You can't leave," he said, his voice raspy with pain. "The change has already begun in her. Soon the voices will start." "We'll find a way to stop it," I said, though I had no idea if that was possible. "There is no stopping it," my father replied, "only embracing it." He gestured around the vast chamber. "We've been preparing for centuries, building our numbers. Soon we'll be ready to return to the surface." I felt cold dread wash over me. Return. "The world above belongs to us too," he said. "We were forced down here, but we've grown stronger in the darkness, evolved. Soon the night will belong to us again." Beside me, Chang moaned softly, her legs giving way. The black lines had started appearing on her neck, spreading upward toward her face. "We need to move," Dr. Rodriguez urged. We backed out of the throne room into the passage. More pale figures had gathered in the main cavern, watching us from the shadows, keeping their distance from our UV lights, but not retreating. "There's too many," Dr. Rodriguez whispered. "We'll never make it back the way we came." She was right. Dozens of creatures now filled the cavern, with more emerging from the wall houses and tunnels. Some looked fully transformed, while others were like Webb and Lopez, caught between human and something else. I remembered my father's journal, the passages I had studied so carefully. "There's another way out. Dad wrote about it. A tunnel that leads to a different part of the mesa." "Do you know where it is?" Dr. Rodriguez asked. "I think so." I pointed to a narrow opening on the far side of the cavern, opposite from where we'd entered. "Through there." Getting there meant crossing the open cavern with creatures on all sides. I checked my UV flashlight battery, already dimming after being on for so long. "Chang," I said, trying to keep her focused. "I need you to walk. Just a little farther." Her eyes met mine, and I could see she was fighting whatever was happening to her. "They're in my head," she whispered, whispering. "Don't listen," I told her. "Stay with us." With Dr. Rodriguez on one side and me on the other, we began moving across the cavern floor, UV lights sweeping in wide arcs to keep the creatures at bay. They followed at the edge of the light, their movements jerky and spider-like. We were halfway across when my flashlight flickered, the battery failing. The creatures sensed the weakness immediately, pressing closer, growing bolder. Minds dying. "Two," Dr. Rodriguez said, her voice tight with fear. Then I saw it. Webb moving toward us from the left, Lopez from the right. They had circled around while the other creatures distracted us. "Thomas," Webb called, his voice eerily calm. "Don't fight this. It's easier if you don't fight." From behind us came a familiar raspy voice. My father had left his throne room, and now cut off our retreat. "You're surrounded, son," he said. "Put down the lights, accept the gift." Chang suddenly straightened beside me, her eyes clearing. "The pack," she said. "In my pack." I had been carrying her backpack along with mine. She reached into it and pulled out a flare, the emergency signal flare each of us carried. With shaking hands, she sparked it to life. The red-hot flare blazed, with intense light casting everything in a crimson glow. But more importantly, it gave off ultraviolet rays as part of its spectrum. The effect on the creatures was immediate. They screeched and retreated, covering their eyes and faces. "Run!" I shouted. We sprinted across the remaining open space toward the tunnel I had spotted. The creatures couldn't follow directly, but they moved rapidly along the walls and ceiling, trying to cut us off. The tunnel was narrow and sloped sharply upward. Chang struggled, her strength fading as the transformation, and progressed. The black lines now covered most of her neck and were creeping up her jaw. "Keep going," I urged. "We're getting out of here." The flare wouldn't last long, maybe 5 minutes total. Already its light was less intense. The tunnel twisted and turned, making it hard to maintain our bearings. But it definitely led upward, which gave me hope. Then the passage opened into another large chamber with multiple exits, like a hub with spokes leading off in different directions. In the center stood a stone altar, ancient and worn, covered in symbols similar to the ones we had seen outside. "Which way?" Dr. Rodriguez asked, turning in a circle to sweep the rapidly dying flare across the various openings. I pulled out my father's journal, flipping frantically through the pages by the red light. There, a rough map of this very chamber. "That," I said, pointing to a passage that seemed to angle upward more steeply than the others. "That should lead to the surface." As we moved toward it, the flare sputtered and dimmed further. From the tunnel we had emerged from came sounds of pursuit. The scratching of claws on stone, the soft, hissing breath of the creatures. "They're coming," Chang said, her voice changing, becoming raspier. We hurried into the new passage, which quickly narrowed until we had to proceed single file. The air felt different here, drier, with a hint of desert wind. We were getting closer to the surface. Just as the flare gave its final light and died, we emerged into a small chamber with a crack of natural light visible above. A narrow fissure in the ceiling that led to the outside world. "We made it," Dr. Rodriguez said, relief flooding her voice. But our victory was short-lived. The fissure was at least 15 feet above us, a vertical climb up smooth rock face. And with our equipment left behind and Chang barely able to stand, it might as well have been 100 feet. "Help me stack these," I said, pointing to fallen rocks that littered the chamber floor. We quickly built a rough pile that got us about halfway to the opening. From the passage behind us came the sounds of approaching creatures. Closer now, no longer held back by the flare's light. "Give me your UV light," I told Dr. Rodriguez, taking her nearly dead flashlight and combining its batteries with mine. It gave us a weak beam, but it was something. "I'll boost you up first," I told her. "Then you can help pull Chang up." Dr. Rodriguez climbed onto the rock pile, then, with my help, managed to reach the fissure and pull herself into it. She turned and reached down. "Chang, your turn," I said, but Chang wasn't looking at the escape route. She was staring back into the dark passage, her eyes now almost completely black. "They're here," she whispered. I shined the weak UV light into the passage. Eyes reflected back, dozens of them just beyond the light's reach. "Chang, we have to go now," I insisted. She turned to me, her expression torn between fear and something else, a kind of longing. The black lines had reached her cheeks now. "I can hear them clearly now," she said. "Everything they're saying." "Don't listen," I begged. Fight it! Above us, Dr. Rodriguez called down urgently. Hurry! I helped Chang onto the rock pile and tried to boost her up toward the fissure. But she was heavier than she looked, and my strength was fading after days, with little sleep or food. From the passage, a familiar figure emerged, Webb keeping just at the edge of the UV light's range. Thomas, he said calmly, it's over. Put her down. Join us. Beyond him, more shapes moved in the darkness. One of them stepped forward, my father, his transformed face as patient as it was alien. Son, he said, enough running. Chang suddenly went rigid in my arms, her back arching unnaturally. A sound came from her throat, not her voice, but a high-pitched keening like the creature's made. She's turning, Webb said. The final stage has begun. I held Chang as she convulsed, her fingers lengthening before my eyes, the joints popping. As they rearranged, her jaw stretched, making room for new teeth that pushed through her gums. Chang, I said desperately, stay with me. For a moment her eyes cleared, the person inside fighting back against the transformation. Go, she whispered in her own voice. Tell what happened here. With strength I didn't know she had left, Chang suddenly pushed away from me, turning toward the creatures. In the same motion, she pulled something from her pocket, the second emergency flare. Run, she shouted, her voice already losing its human quality. She sparked the flare to life and charged toward the creatures, toward my father and Webb. The blazing light sent them screeching and scrambling backward. Dr. Rodriguez grabbed my hand from above. Thomas, now! With her help, I scrambled up the rock pile and into the narrow fissure. Below, Chang had reached the creatures, the flare held out before her like a sword. But she wasn't attacking them. Instead, she pressed the flare against the chamber ceiling. The intense heat against the ancient dry rock caused it to crack. With a sound like thunder, the ceiling began to collapse. Chang looked up at me one last time, her eyes almost completely black now, but still recognizably hers. Then the cave-in took her, along with the creatures, sealing the passage in a cloud of dust and falling stone. Dr. Rodriguez pulled me upward, through the fissure, as rocks continued to fall below. We squeezed through the narrow opening, scraping skin from our arms and faces, until finally we emerged into the harsh desert sunlight. We were on the far side of the mesa, miles from our original camp. The sun was high in the sky. We had spent nearly 2 days underground. As the dust settled below us, I heard something that froze my blood. Faint scratching sounds from beneath the newly fallen rocks. The cave-in hadn't killed them all. They were already digging their way out. We need to move, I said. Now. Dr. Rodriguez nodded, her face streaked with dirt and tears. Without another word, we began the long walk back to civilization, leaving behind the darkness and whatever was climbing its way toward the light. We walked for hours across the desert, the sun beating down mercilessly. Neither of us talked about what we'd seen. What would we even say? Who would believe us? By nightfall, we reached a ranger station at the edge of the monument. The rangers there thought we were delirious from heat exposure when we stumbled in, dehydrated and covered in cuts and bruises. Cave collapse, I told them, sticking to the story Dr. Rodriguez and I had agreed on during our walk. Toxic gas pockets. We got out, but the others, they sent search teams the next day, but they never found the entrance we'd escaped from. The original cave entrance had somehow sealed itself, massive rocks blocking the way that couldn't have fallen naturally, according to the report. The official investigation concluded that a series of small earthquakes had caused cave-ins throughout the system. Lopez, Webb, and Chang were declared dead, their bodies unrecoverable. After 2 weeks of searching, the case was closed. Dr. Rodriguez and I gave our statements separately. We never mentioned the pale creatures or the underground city. Who would believe that? Instead, we talked about getting lost, about hallucinations from lack of oxygen, about freak accidents in unstable tunnels. I was placed on administrative leave. Dr. Rodriguez returned to her university, but something in her had changed. We spoke. On the phone occasionally, comparing notes, making sure our stories stayed aligned. I keep hearing them, she told me during one late-night call, 3 months after our escape. The whispers, especially at night. They're calling me back. I told her to see a therapist, that it was just trauma. But I heard them too sometimes, soft voices just at the edge of hearing, speaking words I couldn't quite make out. 2 months later, Dr. Rodriguez took her own life. She left a short note. The voices won't stop. They're finding new ways out. The government sent a team to pour concrete into the few cave openings they'd found in the area. The entire section of Bear's Ears was declared off limits due to geological instability. But I knew better. Concrete wouldn't hold them. Rock couldn't stop them. They had been down there for centuries. Patient, evolving, waiting. My father had called it their return, as if the surface world had once been theirs. 5 years later, I sit in my small apartment surrounded by maps, satellite images, geological surveys. I've been tracking heat signatures, strange readings, unexplained disappearances across the southwest. Connecting dots no one else sees. They're spreading, slowly, carefully, but definitely spreading. New openings appear in places miles from the original site. Hikers go missing. Strange sounds get reported. Tomorrow I'm going back to Cedar Mesa. My backpack is ready, filled with UV lights, flares, weapons, and recording equipment. I've spent years preparing, studying, planning. This time, I know what I'm looking for. This time, I know their weaknesses. Because the truth is, we never escaped that cave. Not really. We just brought a piece of it back with us. The darkness, the whispers, the knowledge that beneath our feet, something ancient and patient is waiting. The pale crawlers are coming, and only I know how to stop them. I check my UV lights one more time. Their glow harsh in the darkness of my room. It's almost dawn. Time to go hunting. Time to finish what began in the hollows.